Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Success Series. I'm your host, David Berg. I'm here with our co-host, Michael Konowski. Our guest today is a good friend and the founder of Uncommon Entertainment, Josh Zipkowitz. Josh is the brand behind some of the largest events in the world at the Super Bowl, as some of you may know. We're going to dive into his story. He's also building a B2B SaaS company as well. Josh, absolute pleasure to have you on.
Pleasure to be here.
Yes, thank
Glad we
you.
could find the time, finally.
Absolutely. So tell our listeners all about your story, what you're doing today, and how you got here.
Sure. So in these conversations, always like, where to start, right? So your whole life flashes
right
in front of you. For me, my journey has been kind of all over the place. People always ask me, like, how did you get into this? I feel like it's a question that's like people expect you to have an answer to, and for me, it just kind of happened by accident. I found myself at the right place at the right time, and I just kind of figured it out along the way. I, from an early age, knew that college wasn't the answer for me. I like to call myself a 3-time dropout because I think it was 3 different times.
Wow, in college?
In college, yeah. All before the age of 21.
You went, came back, left, came back?
Just didn't work. I just didn't feel the vibe. I didn't feel the energy. It felt like it was... I was kind of wasting my time. I definitely was not the academic as a teenager, and just wanted to kind of take more control over my life from the beginning. So, it's funny. Obviously, I sort of work in music, and just yesterday I was on the phone with an agent in the music business. And we had just done a deal together for one of his artists, and he was asking me a bunch of questions to get to know me, and I was talking a little bit about my story, and I joked to him that it was a bit of a preparation for today. And while I almost feel like how I got here is a little less important than the present day, the cliff notes, if you will, I'm happy to share. I started off at the age of 17 as a nightclub promoter before I was even allowed.
Oh, I never knew that about you.
Nightclubs, yeah. It was the summer of 2012, and I just graduated high school, and I was, a New York City kid just out in the nightclub scene, and got approached, and I remember feeling like it was the coolest thing I could possibly be doing at the time. Like there was nothing better for me in the moment. And I quickly realized that it was not a long-term chapter for me. But what I did get from it is I touched the world of hospitality, of guest experience, of interaction in a way where you can really create impact, whether that's on a smaller scale like it was in the past or the scale that it is for me today. So from there on, I kind of bounced around between a few different hospitality related companies, and eventually was put in a situation where I had a shot to do it on my own. More specifically, we helped launch the Palm Tree Music Festival with Miles Shear and Kygo, which is now 4 years in the making, and a global festival around the world. And we have been trying to figure out how to do it for a couple years, and the moment just came where it was like, hey, let's just do this. I think we had 2 months to pull it off, which is definitely not as much time as one would plan for normally. But I remember thinking in that moment, and this goes to some of the ethos and attitude I have around, business and outlook in general, which is sometimes you just have to surrender. You have to just do it, go for it. And I think that there's no better way to really shift perspective internally and grow than to put yourself in positions where you don't know how it's going to turn out. I think it's the most powerful way. So fast forward a bit, We launched the festival in the Hamptons, and I believe that year it was Kygo, and I think Zed was the.
This is 2020? This was after COVID?
This was in 2021.
Did you have a hard time getting people to, that was like right after people started to get out of their houses?
Yeah, it definitely was a little, it was a little sensitive of a time still. We had about 5,000 people there. So it was on the smaller side of a music festival, but it was also in a niche market out in the Hamptons. And I found it to be just really rewarding. And the entire process, A to Z, was something that I fell in love with. So from there, Uncommon was built, and we found ourselves in a unique niche where we partner with different artists, different brands, different hospitality groups, and try to create moments that are needed within the kind of cultural calendar, if you will. So, as you referenced, we've been doing stuff at Super Bowl for every year for every year of the company, and we've done stuff at Coachella and Fashion Week and tons of stuff at Formula One, and we just like to innovate. So it keeps me busy, and like I said before, I think the most powerful part of it is that it's constantly a process of putting yourself in a uncomfortable position outside of your comfort zone. So it keeps me on my toes.
Right. To jump back a bit, you said college wasn't for you. Did you always know you'd be an entrepreneur? Was it something that came about later in life?
So it's interesting. When I hear a lot of entrepreneurs on podcasts or talking about their journey, so many of them have these stories of, I was 6 years old, mowing lawns, and I was doing this and I was doing that. And I don't necessarily have a ton of like entrepreneur
young stories
stories in my, early childhood or teenage years. There were a handful of moments where I, took my shot at a couple things, but nothing super relevant that really built me into the character that I am. That being said, my passion in my youth was more so to just create a path for myself. The decisions I made while I was still under my parents' roof was they were meaningful. I didn't necessarily know what was going to come of it, but I knew that it was going to create something for myself. I didn't want to follow the, typical path that everyone followed.
Right.
And that was always a source of inspiration for me. Sometimes that manifested in a bit of a rebellious chapter in my life. Luckily, never spun out of control too hard. But as I grew older, reeled it in and was able to channel it into the entrepreneur path that
right.
I followed.
Being in your family's household, did your parents work the typical 9-to-5 job?
My parents are very traditional.
Okay, in all senses.
In all senses. Love you, mom and dad, no judgment. They are more academics than I am. My whole family are definitely more academics than I am. So my dad is a dentist, my mom is an accountant, CFO type, and they work hard and they're incredibly driven and smart, but definitely more of a book smart than my skill set that I find myself falling into.
So were they supportive of you when you said, I'm going to go into entertainment, nightclub, promoter?
Yeah, so looking back, I definitely inspired a lot of fear and a lot of uncertainty when I dropped out of college the first time. I think the second time was probably a little easier, and the third time they kind of trusted the process at that point.
Yeah.
I remember there was a moment that always stuck with me, which was when I liberated myself financially from my parents. They were supportive of me, I think, until I want to say 21 or 22.
Relatively young.
Yeah, relatively young. And I had already started to, find my footing and working on different things, and I was finding success at the time. And it was the first moment that I really connected to in my journey, right? It felt like an anchor, if you will, because I really connected to the essence of the journey, right? And I like to say that I think very practically. I'm very rigid in my planning and my schedule. I live by my calendar. I approach things with a very methodical thought process. And if I zoom out and I look at the bird's eye view of my entire journey, I can identify the moments where I felt, okay, here is where I'm gonna grab onto something and use it as an anchor to push forward into the next chapter of my life.
Speaking of your schedule, what's a 9 to 5 or not a 6 to 5 or a 6 to 8 look like for you today?
Yeah, so schedule is definitely a little all over the place.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is because the type of work that we're in, you just have to be prepared to jump on a plane and be somewhere at a moment's notice.
You're just in Chicago this week?
I was just in Chicago the past couple of days working on an event, and that's a great example, right? We had, we got a call 2.5-3 weeks ago to try to bring a big global artist to Chicago for a private event. And we had everything working against us. We had last minute scramble. We had the summer where everyone is on vacation. We had a time in the kind of entertainment world where there's a lot of artists on tours. There's a lot of conflicting dates. And I had to almost drop everything to try to figure it out, like the past couple weeks, right? So that process is one that is, even in other entrepreneurial, endeavors and other types of businesses, one I think is pretty unique, where it allows you to be super adaptive. I'm happy to say that we were successful in bringing the Killers to Chicago.
That's awesome.
On Tuesday night for a small room of awesome people, which was it was a really special moment for me. It was a totally chaotic process that only came together 48 hours before the event. So we had 3 weeks of uncertainty, and then 2 days before was when we signed the contract and made it all happen. And it was messy, but one of the things that is actually kind of close to my heart at this point is just the ability to understand how to persevere through total chaos. Because when you can do that, it sets yourself up for being unstoppable. There's nothing you can't handle.
Does that happen often, even to this day, right? You have an established brand, you know what you're doing for the most part, events that you're playing every year. Those challenges and craziness still comes up on a week-to-week, month-to-month basis.
Oh, yeah.
They do?
Yeah.
Do you think it's just in this industry that you're in, or do you think anybody looking to start a business will face?
I think that every business and every industry has its unique set of challenges. This business in particular happens to be one where a lot of things have to go right in order for one thing to go right. So, for example, when we contracted the Killers this past week on Sunday for an event on Tuesday, so many stars had to align, right? They have a crew of about 20 people that needed to all be able to coordinate their calendars and move things around last minute to be able to fly from wherever they were to Chicago to, take their role in the event, right? So there's just there's definitely a lot of variables that come into play, specifically within events and entertainment. It can be weather, it can be permitting, it can be personality, it can be ego, it can be something financial with a partner or a venue or an artist, right? There's all these different things that come into play, and it's not an industry where you can play it safe. You can't be conservative in your approach, because you'll end up getting nothing done, because everything is going to have a little bit of risk to it. So it's interesting. When I was thinking about some topics for the conversation today, one of the things I wrote down, and something that's been on my mind lately, is the concept of the hero complex. And it's not something that ever dawned on me up until recently. And I think it was my wife who pointed it out, that I've taught myself to not only thrive in the hero role, but I actually crave a bit of chaos in order to come in as Superman and save the day.
Right.
And I think that there's a certain layer of ego there that wants to prove myself and prove that I can play that part,
right,
and be that guy. And I think, ego is probably the most important metric to pay attention to in business, because it can be the ultimate supportive system, or it can be your complete downfall. And when I think about playing that hero role, it sounds very dangerous to me, honestly. Like, it doesn't necessarily sit well with me. I don't want to attract a chaotic situation in order to persevere. I'd rather things just happen nice and smoothly, and just play along and do my part.
Do you feel that comes from a fear of not being needed, and that's why if there was no chaos on your life and everything ran exactly as you'd like it to, what would be your role?
Potentially, I think we all seek a certain level of validation that likely is subconscious, and it's not something that we pay active attention to. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with wanting to be validated. I think that it probably is a natural course as humans on this planet, right? If you want to go even a little deeper into the spiritual realm, we know that we haven't earned any of our gifts, right? Nothing we have, something as simple as our breath in the morning, or as more complicated as physical, more tangible things around us, we haven't done anything to deserve it. It's all been just given to us from the Creator. And
expand on that, because I think our listeners, especially people that are successful, I spent 10 years, 20 years, I sacrificed everything to manifest what I have. You're saying that really wasn't because of their doing, so can you shed a little light on that?
Well, we know it's not ours. One thing I've found myself saying in the past is, if we can't control when it's going to rain, why do we think we can control when something is given to us, when we receive some sort of blessing or gift or anything, or when something is taken away? So if we can't control one thing, by definition, it means we can't control anything.
Right.
So it's actually a good example of like how my mind works from a very practical standpoint. It's almost like just A plus B equals C at that point. And I think that for me, and I know for others who I've spoken to on the topic as well, it's part of the journey. It's part of the experience, specifically in entrepreneurship, to understand not only how things get manifested, but also to try to connect the dots and say, okay, why was I given this? Why did this thing happen? And I think, the kind of statement that comes to me, and it's a bit of a slippery slope because you don't want to jump too deep down the rabbit hole, but I think I would say question everything. The good, the bad, the in between. Pay super close attention to it. I can share that for me, one thing that's been on my to-do list and part of my own personal growth and transformation that I have not succeeded in even 1% close to what I want it to be, is coming to a place of active recalibration on a daily basis at the end of the day, specific through journaling, right? I feel, people talk about journaling all the time and do it in the morning and do it at night before bed. And I think there's no rhyme or reason. There's no recipe that works for everyone, but I do believe really strongly in that process of question everything, right? And really take notice, take stock of what's happening to you. It'll inspire an educational process within that only has one outcome, which is growth. And as you get to know yourself better, you are put it in a better position to receive those things that are meant for you, whether they look and feel like you might have dreamt them up, isn't always, it doesn't always correlate, but that process of questioning everything as well.
Yeah. You've touched on self-reflection, spirituality. Was that something always inherent to you? When did you decide to delve in spirituality? Is it something your parents raised you with?
So I was not raised in a spiritual home. I found the world of spirituality mainly through the Kabbalah Center. A friend randomly brought me through the doors to a introductory class with David Guillaume in 2014.
Wow,
10
I believe,
years ago. 2014 or 2015. Could be 2016. Regardless. And I'll share a little story that always makes me laugh, which is I remember sitting in that first class, and I don't know if it's still part of the Kabbalah 1 curriculum, but David had a graphic on the board, and it was all these different colors, and each color represented a different category of desire. So it would say love and money and health, happiness, peace. And he asked the room, tell me, which one do you want? Like, what speaks to you? Yeah. And everyone raised their hand, and everyone said something different. And I think he called me out without even me raising my hand. And I think I said money, which doesn't surprise me. But
was that before success or after initial success?
It was
somewhere in the middle of the process.
Somewhere in the middle, but on the earlier side. It was
Yeah.
almost 10 years ago. And he had like a visceral reaction. He was like, no, wrong.
He said wrong.
And he went on to explain that from a spiritual perspective, we're not looking to attach ourselves to one desire. We're here to more holistically look at the blessings in our life as a system almost, right? We don't want to just pick and choose one specific thing to grab onto or desire, right? That we live in an endless world where we can have the wildest desires that we can possibly dream of, and we can manifest them. And I think that is a big part of what drew me in initially. I always, in my past, prior to developing a set of spiritual tools for myself, I always found that I was a little bit different. I felt like I thought differently. I felt maybe a little misunderstood at times, especially in my youth. And as I grew up, I was looking to understand my essence. I was looking to understand who I am, what I am, how it all makes sense and comes together.
Right.
And through the spiritual path of Kabbalah, I feel like I was able to just understand a little more about myself and my path, and it just drew me in. It spoke to me heavily, and I can say with absolute certainty, I would not be anywhere close to where I am today, in all fronts, if it weren't for finding a spiritual path. And it at this point, I actually have a hard time relating to those who aren't open or aren't
on a spiritual path. We know environment's huge. You mentioned in your spiritual path, being around people that are like you, or at least in the mindset of spirituality. When you were younger, before spirituality, did you find yourself surrounding yourself with people that were business-driven, entrepreneur-driven, or were you less careful around who you spent your time with?
It wasn't even a concept for me. When I was just starting out, the approach was scattered. It was chaotic. It wasn't thoughtful. It wasn't dynamic in the way that I ended up growing into. And it's a pretty well-known concept at this point, right? Surround yourself with people who you want to
be like,
and learn from. And I think that the more practical approach, because everything has to have a practical twist to it. You have to really think about things in a way where it's like, okay, that sounds great. What am I actually going to do about it? And the practical lens that I would think through is this. There's a step before that, which is, how do I determine who those people are and where I find them and how I can put myself in that same room, right? Because you might think that you want to hang out with a billionaire because you want to make $1 billion. But actually, what your soul and what your story needs is to hang out with a therapist to heal. Because you're never going to get there without working on yourself first. So I think that it's super important to, instead of trying to, leech on to people or find someone specific to, put in your circle, to actually ask questions that are true, deep, transformative questions by yourself, and get those answers that will then lead you to the path that you're supposed to be on and the rooms that you're supposed to be in.
Right. But let's say in your current situation, you have a group of friends that you're with or that you've known for years. How can you determine if they're pushing you forward or if they're pulling you down?
Energy. It's all about energy between people.
Okay.
I'm super grateful to have some amazing, supportive characters around me.
Call them characters. That's just a figure of speech, or that's
or
quite literally.
It's a figure of speech, but they definitely are characters.
Okay.
And the ones that I am closest with are ones that I not only truly feel connected to, but they are people who I feel are connected within, and whatever that means for them in their life. You know, people say good-hearted people or people with good intentions, and that's all part of it. But there's a certain type of fabric to a person that I specifically look for. It's a feeling of trust, of vulnerability, a feeling of good intention, of positivity, and my cast of characters all look very different. They're not all in one specific industry. They're not all, necessarily wildly successful. I think each of them individually support me in ways and lift me up in ways I need to be supported. And separately, I try to do the same for them.
You had a successful business for the last couple of years, Uncommon Entertainment. How did you have A, the humility, and B, the desire to start a new business given in the same fields, but from scratch?
Yeah, so you use the word humility, which is one that very often comes to mind. We work in this world that is pretty flashy. It definitely can swallow you up in the sense of playing to the negative parts of your ego.
Right.
And I look back at the last 3-4 years and look at what we've accomplished and the artists we've worked with, and there's a reason why I built this whole wall of memories and photographs, which is I'm able to really look at them and feel it.
Really? You can go back to any of these given moments?
I can go back to most of these, and I can feel what I felt.
Wow.
In that moment. And the speed and level of which we've kind of worked through a lot of these different events and artists you've worked with, I don't want to say I've become a little jaded to it, but the last year, as we were preparing to start this new business, part of the consciousness was, okay, I've worked with Drake and Justin Bieber and Post Malone and Kygo and Chris Martin and Calvin Harris and all these great artists. What's next for me, right? How do I continue to expand on my skill set? How do I continue to develop as an entrepreneur? And it's interesting. So one thing I like to tell some of my employees and even new hires that we make in the company is, if you can survive and thrive in the world of live events and entertainment, my outlook is it will prepare you for being able to handle absolutely anything.
Really?
Because of just the dynamic nature and the curveballs and the stress level, right? It takes a very specific personality type and composure to be able to manage an event where 5,000 people are all going to show up at the same time.
Right.
Right? And there's tons of logistics and technology and people and personalities and all sorts of stuff. And jumping into tech felt like my next
level.
My next level. So
when you were doing these events, and what's the last event you did? Was it Palm Tree in this past summer?
So the last event we did was on Tuesday night in Chicago.
Yep.
With the Killers.
Right.
It was a 3-week process from when we got the initial call to produce this for a private individual. But it was 2.5 weeks of just hitting a wall and not being able to accomplish anything. Just running into lots of roadblocks and challenges. And then 4 days before the event, Friday, we come up with this plan, make an offer, and then Sunday, we're able to iron out some deal points, and we actually ended up switching the venue as well 2 days before entirely. So, it just goes to show, like, working on doing an event with the Killers is going to just naturally present a certain level of variables that you're going to have to learn to adapt to.
Right.
That being said, a 300-person private concert is not our typical event. The last event before that was the Palm Tree
And how many people were there?
In the Hamptons. There were probably 10, 11,000 people there.
Wow.
It's a high-end, more intimate music festival that takes place in the Hamptons. And this year we had Swedish House Mafia, Sophie Tucker, Kygo, and a few other artists. It's become a cultural moment in itself out in the Hamptons at this point.
Can anybody come to that?
Anybody can buy a ticket.
Where can they find it? Can they already find one for 25?
The Hamptons for 2025 is not announced yet, but we do have other festivals on sale within the Palm Tree ecosystem, and it's up just palmtreemusicfestival.com.
Okay. And then, so obviously all this work goes into it prior to the event. When you finally get there, there's 10,000 people on the stands, the production's perfect. Do you enjoy that moment? Or is it still things can go wrong at any time? And my question is, are you on when you're at the festival, or can you just be there, enjoy the music, enjoy the good time?
So it's changed over the years. At first, I was definitely hands-on, glued to my phone, monitoring there's 10 different group chats, all different teams, and people all communicating at the same time, looking for any fires and ways that I can, be helpful if I'm needed at any time. That being said, even in the beginning, I always made sure that I found at least a few moments to just sink my teeth in. And almost on a kind of ritual basis, myself and my co-founder, Jake Nussbaum, would always try to just spend some time together. Just try to find a moment during the performance to find through a crowd of people, just connect and take it all in. We've shared moments of having tears together at events and had super meaningful and emotional experiences. But for me, it comes down to two things. The first is the level of build-up, and then the climax of the experience. Not necessarily for me, but of the whole room of people, whether it's 300 people or it's 10,000 people. The understanding that myself, my team, my company, all the different people involved worked for sometimes 6 months or even a year on something, and now this is that exact moment. The energy that they feel, smiles that they have, the euphoria, the moment where their expectation actually comes to reality through the months of hard work. That's, I think, the power to it. And I think in anything you do in life, you have to be able to grab onto something really authentic. You have to be able to find whatever essence of something that you're doing that really speaks to you in order to create a fulfilling and lasting partnership with yourself and your business. If you can't find that and you are drawn to just making money or just networking or whatever it is that's right in front of your face that might be the flashy diamond at the time, you're going to burn out. It's inevitable. We've seen it too many times over in all sorts of different businesses. You have to be able to experience that energy, that essence. And I'll share one more thing which popped into my head, which is there's a word that I've been throwing around lately that I can't seem to shake. It's a funny word, but I find that it's incredibly pertinent to specifically my level of work and my line of work rather, and what I enjoy about it, which is that it's sticky. And what I mean by that is there's so many touch points, right? If you just think about having like some honey in your hands, it goes anywhere and then it gets stuck to you. And the level in which my exposure to people has grown over the years, and I've allowed myself and been able to immerse myself in a sticky environment where I just get to touch. I get to get stuck and glued to all different types of people, companies, organizations, charities, artists, brand, like it just, there's so many different moving parts and people that go into this that it's really eye-opening, and it allows me to also find those characters that I referred to earlier, right? Or I get that through the exposure to the different angles and variables within the business.
Right. You mentioned all the glitz and glamour, which is inherent in looking at this industry. For people on the outside, maybe it's not entertainment, but other careers they're pursuing. Learning from your experience, what's the hardest, most challenging time that you've ever went through? It can be professional or in your personal life. And then what did you do to overcome that?
There are constant moments for us in the business where things fly at us at a super fast pace, and to be fully honest, usually it's not according to plan. This is not a world where I would say the majority of the things that happen are the ones that we want it to happen that certain way. And it has the potential to really beat you up and eat you alive, because sometimes it can feel like nothing's going according to plan. And one thing that I'm actually really proud of is having over the years learned to take those moments that at the surface are so challenging sometimes they don't even make any sense. It's like, why is this happening? Why is my permit getting denied when the writing on the wall was for it to be accepted? Why is this artist backing out? Why is this, sponsor not committing or not sending the money when they said they were? Like, there's so many big picture moments of uncertainty, and they can be really challenging. There have been extreme moments of fear and doubt and worry, and as the years have gone on, I feel like I've been able to maintain just a wider lens, a bird's eye view, if you will, even in the moment, and not let it shift me off my course of certainty, not let it move me in a direction where it seems like it's real or that's what's meant for me, because I don't believe that chaos is meant for me. I think that we can experience different things in life that might look like chaos, but at the end of the day, we have the ability to shift not only our consciousness, but I think also all of the outcomes around us.
You mentioned fear and insecurities before. It doesn't have to be current, but what's a big insecurity that you've faced, and then how did you, or how do you deal with it, right? Because I think that in this industry, being a entrepreneur, being somebody starting a business, all of your insecurities come to the surface. It's something that I'm experiencing now in real time, and you have to confront them, because if you're raising money, if you're hiring employees, and you have these big insecurities, none of that's going to work. So how did you deal with that, and how do you deal with it?
Yeah, so I'll share something from the past. I basically started working when I was 18.
Right.
And I remember very specifically at the time being extremely, extremely self-conscious about my age. Because I was all the way at the bottom of the career ladder, most practically just from a perspective of age, right?
Right.
There's very few people younger than me working in the world, at least in a professional sense. And for 5 years or so, very actively, I let it get to me. I would lie to people.
Wow, about your age?
About my age.
I did that a few times too.
And looking back, it was so weird.
It's like, why are you doing that?
Yeah. It's like pretty dysfunctional,
Yeah.
actually, to like think about just the internal thought process of like, okay, I'm in a situation that I need to now like lie and protect myself in order to project something that I think that they want to see. And it dissipated over the years. With time, and as I grew into myself, it's not like when I was 25, I'm all of a sudden like so old and like have it all figured out. But as I, was in my 20s and I found more success and I was doing different things, and I think I was just a little more grounded and practical in my approach, and also a little more confident in who I was, what I was doing, what my pitch was, how I presented myself to the world. And you always hear this question of like, what would you tell your younger self?
Right.
Which I'm sure I could come up with something or a variety of things.
I want to ask you that. Yeah.
But related to this concept is I think I would tell myself, but also other young adults, to be really strategic with the situations they put themselves in, specifically as it relates to the concept of your age. You have to put yourself in a position to own it. And whatever that it is, if you're not going to feel comfortable owning it as the 18-year-old or the 21-year-old or the 25-year-old,
then it becomes an issue.
And you're not going to be ready internally for that situation. There are entrepreneurs out there who are 19 years old, 20 years old, and in the early 20s that have gone and raised tons of money and building amazing companies. I doubt they have to lie about their age. Right. So if you think about what just the human capacity is, if one person is able to do that and have that experience and to step into those shoes, then for sure everyone is able to step into whatever shoes are meant.
With regardless of what insecurity it is for you, if it's age, whatever.
Correct. So
the last thing I'll ask you, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Someone once shared with me, specifically in context to our business, where we work for so long and then there's this like apex and there's this high and we feel like we're on top of the world and we've put on this amazing show for people. Inevitably, there's going to be a crash afterwards. And what fascinates me, or what fascinated me at the time and still to this day, was less about the practicality of it and more so just about the complexity of just our own energy, right? How many people truly and consciously think about what's gonna be my experience after I get what I want? Everyone is...
Until that point.
Everyone's, I think, looking, not to overgeneralize, but I think people typically are looking to accomplish a goal and then adapt and figure it out, right? So I want to do this.
And then everything comes together.
And then everything, comes together and life goes on. But I think it's super important to, at least based on my experience, I've seen it. I've experienced it. I've experienced that high and then the crash right afterwards. And I think that the part of the solution is to be as mindful of every single moment, every single word, every single interaction, every single ounce of energy you put into something. Ensure that your consciousness and your energy is aligned in a way that you would look back and feel good about and feel proud at, and feel like you really stepped it up and gave it your maximum effort from an energetic standpoint. Because then you'll be able to grab onto something and experience it and look back and say, you know what? That was amazing. And I really built it up in a way that I feel good about.
Right.
And not just went through the motions.
And that downfall.
Experienced it and then crashed from there.
Beautiful. Josh, thank you for being on.
It's been awesome.
It was an absolute pleasure. Guys,
Likewise.
Josh Zipkowitz, Uncommon Entertainment and SAS Tech. We'll see you guys next week.